The frisbee sailed through the air, a bright orange disk against the deepening blue of the spring evening sky. Kevin leaped, the fading sunlight catching in his wide grin as he snatched it just inches from the ground. "That's what I'm talking about," he yelled, tossing it back to Antron. Raymond sat on the edge of the basketball court lacing up his sneakers. He'd arrived late, missing the preliminary trash talk and playful shoves. All right, save some energy for the game," he called out, jogging onto the court. Yusef was already there, dribbling with practiced ease, the rhythmic thump a steady pulse in the otherwise quiet park. Corey leaned against the chain-link fence watching the others, a slight smile playing on his lips. He preferred observing, cataloging the nuances of their movements, the subtle shifts in their moods. Laughter echoed around them, a comfortable sound that mingled with the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of city traffic. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming lilacs, a welcome change from the stale, recycled air of their classrooms. They were young, full of energy, and for a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift. Then the sirens started. A high-pitched wail sliced through the tranquil atmosphere, growing louder with alarming speed. Everyone froze. The frisbee dropped to the ground. Yusef stopped dribbling. Raymond paused mid-stretch. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by a shared, unspoken unease. More sirens joined the chorus, their discordant screams bouncing off the trees, closer now, much closer. "What's going on?" Antron asked, his voice tight. Kevin shrugged, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the park. "I don't know. Maybe a car accident?" But the sheer number of sirens suggested something far more serious. They were converging on the park, the sound intensifying, pressing down on them like a physical weight. A knot formed in Corey's stomach. He pushed himself off the fence, his gaze fixed on the park entrance where flashing blue and red lights were now visible. "Maybe we should go," Raymond said, his earlier enthusiasm vanished. Yusef nodded, his brow furrowed. "Yeah, something doesn't feel right." The air crackled with tension, the carefree joy of the evening replaced by a palpable sense of dread. The sirens wailed, a mournful cry that seemed to herald something terrible. Accusations in the night. The flashlight beam lanced through the gloom, freezing them in place like specimens on a slide. "Against the wall, all of you. Now." The command, sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the park's sudden hush. "What's going on?" Miguel stammered, a tremor betraying his bravado. Dread coiled in his gut, a constricting serpent. "Spare us the act. We know you were here. We know what happened." The officer, a granite-faced giant, leveled a thick finger. "The jogger. You assaulted her." Disbelief rippled through the group. Carlos's laugh scraped out a desperate, brittle sound. "Assaulted who? We were just hanging out." "Hanging out? With blood on you?" Another officer moved in, eyes like chips of flint. His light zeroed in on Antonio's arm, transforming a minor scrape from an earlier tumble by the lake into a ghoulish wound. "It's nothing," Antonio insisted, tugging at his sleeve. "I fell, near the water." "A likely story," the first officer roared, spittle flecking his lips. "We have witnesses. They saw you fleeing the scene." "Witnesses? Who saw? What?" Raymond challenged, his jaw clenched. "They're mistaken. We did nothing." "Yeah," Kevin squeaked, his voice strangled by fear. Panic had seized him, a vice on his vocal cords. "We were together, all evening." The officers exchanged a look, a silent, chilling appraisal that sent a jolt of pure fear through Miguel. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the air growing heavy and oppressive. Their casual Friday had curdled into a waking nightmare, and they were caught in its vortex, innocent, yet already judged. "Search them," the lead officer snapped. "Then book them. Attempted murder. That's what this is shaping up to be." Behind closed doors, the fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed, a sickly drone that vibrated in Miguel's teeth. He and Kevin had been herded in like cattle, separated at the front desk without a word. Now, he sat alone on a hard plastic chair, in a small room painted a depressing shade of gray. The only furniture was the chair and a metal table bolted to the floor. A detective, a large man with a mustache that drooped like a sad bloodhound, entered without knocking. He carried a file, slapping it onto the table with a force that made Miguel jump. "Miguel Alvarez, right? You know why you're here?" Miguel swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "No, sir." He tried to keep his voice steady, but it wavered. "Don't play coy with me, kid. We know you were in the park last night." The detective leaned in close, his breath stale with coffee and something else, something vaguely metallic. "We know you were with the others." I was just hanging out," Miguel stammered. "We didn't do anything." The detective chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Hanging out? Is that what you call attacking a woman, leaving her for dead?" Miguel's eyes widened. "No, we didn't." "Save it," the detective interrupted, his voice hardening. "We have witnesses. People saw you. They saw your friends." He opened the file, flipping through photographs, blurry, grainy images of figures running in the dark. "Recognize anyone?" Miguel squinted, his heart pounding in his chest. The figures were indistinct, shadows against shadows. I can't tell." "Sure you can't." The detective slammed the file shut. "Look, kid, I'm trying to help you. Tell me the truth and maybe things will go easier on you. Who hit her? Who held her down?" Miguel felt a knot of panic tighten in his stomach. He didn't know anything, couldn't say anything. But the detective's eyes, cold and unwavering, told him that silence wasn't an option. He was trapped, alone, with no one to help him. Words they didn't mean, the fluorescent lights hummed, a relentless buzzing torment in Corey's ears. He hadn't slept in what felt like days. Each question, each accusation chipped away at him, leaving him raw and exposed. He just wanted it to stop. "Tell us what really happened, Corey." Detective Miller's voice was a low growl, inches from his face. "We know you were there." Corey shook his head, vision blurring. "I told you. I was just hanging out with my friends." "Hanging out while a woman was being beaten? Is that it?" Another officer slammed a photo on the table, a blurry image of the jogger, her face swollen and bruised. Corey flinched. He didn't do that. He wouldn't. The pressure mounted. Hours bled into each other. Promises of leniency whispered in his ear. Threats barked at him from across the table. Raymond had already confessed, they said. Antron, too. He was the only one holding out. Fear gnawed at him, a cold knot in his stomach. If he just told them what they wanted to hear, maybe they'd let him go home. Maybe his mom would stop crying. "Okay," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I was there." Relief washed over Miller's face, predatory and satisfied. "Tell us everything, Corey. Don't leave anything out." The words tumbled out, a jumbled mess of half-truths and outright lies. He repeated what they wanted to hear, filling in the blanks with fabricated details. Each sentence felt like a betrayal, a piece of himself he was giving away. Across the hall, Antron sat slumped in his chair, tears streaming down his face. The detective's pen scratched across the paper as he dictated a confession, a story pieced together from fragments of truth and carefully planted suggestions. Antron barely registered the words, his mind numb, his spirit broken. He just wanted to go home. The tape recorder whirred, capturing every false word, every coerced admission. The truth, buried beneath layers of fear and exhaustion, remained unheard. Trial by media. The headlines screamed guilt before a single gavel had fallen. "Wolf pack tears through Central Park," blared the New York Post, the photo beneath depicting a grainy image of teenagers loitering near a basketball court. The Daily News followed. Suit. "Savages hunt in the park." The word savages printed in blood-red ink. Inside, the articles were worse. Excerpts from the boys' confessions, leaked selectively to paint the most damning picture, were splashed across the pages. Linda Fairstein's quotes carefully chosen and strategically placed, added fuel to the fire. The jogger, now referred to as the Central Park Angel, became a symbol of innocence violated. Her photograph, taken before the attack, full of life and vitality, appearing on every other page. Television news was no better. Graphic recreations of the attack were shown on primetime, accompanied by ominous music and breathless commentary. Talking heads, lawyers, and experts debated the boys' motivations, their backgrounds, their supposed inherent criminality. Raymond Santana's mother, Elena, watched the news, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped her coffee cup. She recognized Raymond in the blurry security footage the news stations kept looping. He looked scared, not savage. She wanted to shout at the screen, to tell everyone that her son was a good boy, that he would never do such a thing. But her voice was lost in the cacophony of condemnation. The city seethed. Graffiti appeared overnight. Hang the Central Park Five. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, the chants growing louder, more furious with each passing day. The boys, barely men, had become monsters in the public's eye, judged and condemned before they'd even had a chance to defend themselves. The presumption of innocence, a cornerstone of the American justice system, was buried beneath a mountain of media-fueled outrage. Guilty verdict, the courtroom air, thick with apprehension and the bitter tang of institutional coffee, pressed down on Raymond. His gaze flickered between his mother's ravaged face, streaked with tears, and the jury's stoic expressions. Kevin was a statue of contained fury, a tick throbbing in his jaw. Antron remained an island of detachment, eyes fixed on some distant point, while Yusuf's lips moved in fervent, silent supplication. Corey, the baby of the group, gnawed his nail, his wide eyes reflecting the terror that gripped Raymond. Days dissolved into a blur of droning legalese, presented exhibits, and hushed conferences with their advocates. The fragile bud of hope, once tentatively blooming, withered under the relentless questioning and the crushing weight of the circumstantial evidence. The prosecution wove a tapestry of violence, a narrative that, despite its loose threads, resonated with the panel of 12. Then came the agonizing wait. Hours bled into an eternity. The courtroom emptied, save for the defendants, their distraught families, and a handful of press vultures, all suspended in suffocating silence. Each rustle of paper, each stifled cough, reverberated like a hammer blow against Raymond's ribs. Finally, a court officer appeared, his face a carefully constructed mask. A wave of breathless anticipation washed over the room as the jurors filed back in, their countenances grave. The foreman, a woman etched with weariness, rose. A tremor laced her voice as she delivered the verdict. On the charge of assault in the first degree, we find the defendant, Raymond Santana, culpable. A collective intake of breath ripped through the room. Raymond's mother crumpled, seeking solace in his aunt's embrace. The foreman continued, the hammer blow falling again and again, each word a fresh wound. For Kevin, Antron, Yusuf, and finally, Corey, culpable, judged, condemned. The judge, a woman known for her implacable demeanor, addressed the defendants, her voice devoid of warmth as she decreed their sentences. Years evaporated, decades vanished. Futures, once bright with promise, extinguished. As the bailiffs escorted them away, Raymond met his mother's gaze. He attempted a reassuring smile, but it felt hollow, a grotesque imitation. He was guilty only of proximity, a victim of circumstance. He was a boy, sentenced to a lifetime sentence of what-ifs. The steel door echoed as it slammed shut, sealing his fate with finality. Years lost, the mess hall reeked of stale bread and simmering resentment. Raymond picked at his congealed potatoes, his gaze fixed on a crack in the wall. Another birthday passed, another year stolen. He imagined his little sister, now a teenager, navigating high school hallways he'd only ever seen in movies. Would she even recognize him when he got out? Khalil's laughter, sharp and brittle, cut through the din. He was playing dominoes with a group of older inmates, his usual bravado masking the haunted look in his eyes. Raymond knew Khalil dreamt of DJing at packed clubs, of feeling the bass vibrate through his chest. Now the only rhythm he heard was the clang of the cell doors. One day a letter arrived for Antonio, smudged and tear-stained. His mother wrote about his younger brother's graduation, his acceptance to college. Antonio stared blankly at the photograph enclosed. A boy in a cap and gown, a stranger. He crumpled the letter in his fist, retreating to his bunk, his sobs muffled by his threadbare blanket. Raymond heard him, the sound a raw wound in the sterile silence of the cell block. Later that week, Raymond found Antonio sketching in his notebook. He was drawing a bustling city street filled with people laughing, vendors hawking their wares. The details were precise, vibrant, a world away from their concrete cage. "You gonna be an architect when you get out, Tonio?" Raymond asked, trying to inject some hope into his voice. Antonio shrugged, not meeting his gaze. "Maybe," he mumbled, his voice flat. "Or maybe I'll just forget what buildings look like." The days bled into weeks, the weeks into years. The outside world became a distant memory, a flickering dream. They were boys when they went in, but inside they were aging, hardening, becoming men forged in the crucible of injustice. They clung to each other, a fragile lifeline in the sea of despair, each carrying the weight of years lost, of stolen futures, of innocence betrayed, a confession of truth. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed, mirroring the frantic energy thrumming beneath Detective Harding's skin. Across the steel table, Matias Reyes sat hunched, his eyes darting around the room before settling on his trembling hands. He'd asked to speak to them, a request born not of remorse, Harding suspected, but of a desperate need to unburden himself. "I did it," Reyes croaked, his voice raspy. "The jogger, in '89. It was me." Harding leaned forward, her pen poised above her notepad. "Tell me everything, Mr. Reyes. Don't leave anything out." Reyes swallowed hard. He recounted the night, the chilling details tumbling out in a disjointed narrative. How he'd been alone, fueled by rage and desperation, how he'd seen the woman jogging, the sudden impulse that had seized him. He described the distinctive silver locket she wore, broken during the attack, tossed into the bushes near the oak tree. Details that hadn't been released to the public. Detective Harding exchanged a look with her partner, Detective O'Malley. This was either the performance of a lifetime, or the truth finally clawing its way to the surface. "The locket," Harding pressed. "Describe it." Reyes hesitated, then gave a precise description of the locket and its intricate floral engraving. He even mentioned the tiny, almost invisible scratch near the clasp. Harding and O'Malley left Reyes under guard and raced to Central Park. The night air was cool and damp as they navigated through the familiar paths, the beams of their flashlights, cutting through the darkness. Guided by Reyes's directions, they found the oak tree he'd described, and after a tense 20 minutes of searching, O'Malley unearthed it. A tarnished silver locket, broken, scratched, and undeniably the same one described by Reyes. Back at the precinct, the lab confirmed the locket matched the victim's missing jewelry. Reyes's DNA, taken during booking, matched the samples from the original crime scene. It was over. The weight of years lifted from the air, replaced by a cautious hope. The 5 men wrongly accused might finally be free. Freedom's shadow. Based on this new evidence and the retraction of prior statements, the judge announced, his words booming across the crowded courtroom, "I have no choice but to reverse the jury's decision. The accused are to be released at once." A stunned silence gave way to a collective intake of breath. Relief surged through Raymond, quickly replaced by a bewildering sense of displacement. After so many years, liberty was alien. As the heavy gates groaned open, the sudden glare of the sun felt like a physical blow. Anxious families waited, their expressions a blur of joyous tears and tentative smiles. Raymond recognized his mother instantly, her eyes brimming with emotion, a bouquet of lilies shaking in her grasp. He held her close, the delicate fragrance, a world away from the harsh disinfectant odors he'd grown accustomed to. The world outside assaulted his senses. The clamor of traffic, the towering buildings, the relentless rush of strangers, all hammered at him, indifferent to his stolen years. He felt spectral, invisible, adrift. Securing employment became an exercise in futility. The stigma clung to him. He's one of those convicts. Potential employers saw the record regardless of the overturned verdict and slammed doors shut. The city, once a beacon of opportunity, now resembled a gilded cage. Staring into the mirror one evening, Raymond barely recognized himself. The boyish features were gone, replaced with a hardened look, a roadmap of violence and despair etched onto his face. He was a free man, yet the prison's grip remained, its dark tendrils twisting around his soul. He reached for the telephone, the cold plastic a stark reality against his skin. He needed someone who understood. Dialing Kevin's number, he hoped that together they could learn to navigate this terrifying reality. Perhaps, together, they could outrun the darkness,